A radius restriction is when the landlord designates a specific area around the project you're looking at where you're prohibited from opening another location or a similar competing business. A landlord may want to do this for a few reasons that essentially all boil down to preventing you from opening a location that cannibalizes a location in their project or building, because they want you to stay in for the entire term of your lease with sales that are as high as possible. If they're entitled to percentage rent, they want the sales you generate in their location to be as high as possible so they capture as much percentage rent as possible. Or maybe you have a sales kickout, or you can terminate your lease if sales are lower than a certain bar. The landlord doesn't want you to be able to exercise that right because you have a location that's close by that's cutting into your sales that could be theirs. In their view, you could be capturing those sales at their location instead. It could be as simple as wanting to have the only location within a certain area. For instance, Apple stores are huge traffic drivers. Having an Apple store at your mall or mixed-use project really puts the project on the map. If Apple were to open in the project across the street too, the landlord loses the impact of having the only Apple store in the area. As a tenant, there may be strategic reasons to open a location close by to an existing location, particularly if you can achieve more favorable terms. As a landlord might suspect, you could do it because you have more favorable terms at a second location. Maybe you don't owe percentage rent there, so you'd want to drive more sales at that location than the original. But you might also want to keep out a competitor. Or you may know that two locations close to each other will actually boost sales at both locations rather than splitting them between the two. Maybe your business can actually increase demand that way. So as the tenant, radius restrictions are something you don't want to have to agree to. Think about Starbucks and how close they are together. They probably couldn't have anticipated that would work during their initial rollout, so radius restrictions would have been a big problem for them if they'd had them. In general, as a tenant, you don't want the landlord having too much control over what business decisions you can make, particularly if those decisions don't even pertain to their location. If you can't get rid of a radius restriction, there are some ways you can mitigate its effects. First, the area covered by the radius can be negotiated. They're called radius restrictions because they commonly refer to a radius of a certain size. So you can't open another location within 3 miles, for example. But it doesn't have to be a radius like that. It could be a certain number of blocks in an urban location or a specific polygon you mutually agree on. So you can really look at a map and consider your likelihood to open within a given area. I've also seen radius restrictions that burn off after a certain amount of time. Maybe the landlord is comfortable that after you've been open for 3 years, they've gotten the full benefit of the buzz around your opening in their location, and they wouldn't mind as much if you were to open across the street. So ideally, no radius restriction, but if you have to have one, you want it to be as small as possible and temporary. We see radius restrictions go hand in hand with exclusive use clauses. If the landlord gets their radius restriction, the tenant gets their exclusive. That certainly doesn't have to be the case, but it is a common arrangement. Remedies for violating a radius restriction, or in layman's terms, what happens when one party violates a radius restriction, are usually left to the lease.